Essentially, Alabama fans are going to have to be making sure that Missouri beats Mississippi State this weekend to decide whether Alabama gets to go to the SEC championship game. That's stupid. I'm sorry. It's not how we should be determining who gets to play for the conference title.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan, and today I am once again joined by Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. Welcome, Matt.
What's up, Ben?
Hey, so look, we have 2 weeks left in the regular season. The SEC is a mess. Who makes the SEC championship game? And depending on that result, who makes the newly expanded college football playoff? And we got a lot to cover here, so I'm just going to ask everybody to bear with me for a second. We'll get to the Mercer game. Alabama won 52-7. Everybody knows that. But the thing that's driving everybody crazy right now are these SEC tiebreaker scenarios, and our heads are spinning. Now, AL.com's Craig Stevenson, he helped break this down for us in a really good article that sort of lists every possible scenario. So let's start with this. Matt, who are the contenders? We've got 2 teams in Texas and Texas A&M who are both 5-1 in SEC play. Georgia is 6-2. Tennessee is 5-2. Alabama and Ole Miss are both 4-2. And after tough losses this week, LSU and Missouri are all but out of this thing at 3-3. But Matt, there is a nightmare scenario where we see a 6-way tie for first place in the SEC and at the end of the regular season, or a 5-way tie for second place. In the latter scenario, either Texas or Texas A&M, who are going to play in College Station on November 30th, they would get the first spot in the SEC championship game. So who would get the second spot? And as Craig writes, in most cases, Alabama would. And there are a handful of these official SEC tiebreakers that are going to determine who goes to Atlanta. And now we're having to analyze them all. Things like head-to-head among tied teams, record versus common opponents among the tied teams, record against the highest place opponent among the tied teams, right? And there's another that greatly benefits Alabama, combined winning percentage of all the conference opponents for each team. Alabama has had a difficult schedule, one of the toughest among the playoff contenders. And like I said, our heads are spinning. And I wasn't kidding. So Matt, first question here. Let's start with this. There is a feeling that if Alabama finishes the regular season with a record of 10-2 and doesn't make the SEC title game, they would become a near lock to make the college football playoff. So if you're Alabama, or if you are an Alabama fan, if you win the SEC championship, you automatically make the playoff and you get a bye. Great. But if you lose, you're 9-3 and you're making a case for one of the final berths. So do you even want to make the SEC championship at this game?
Here's what we have to preface this by saying, Ben, is that you and I are what Najee Harris once referred to as NARPs, which is normal ass regular people. And I'm sorry if I need to edit that later. That's my job as the producer. I can do that. We can discuss that off air, Ben. We're not athletes, okay? And we're not coaches. And I understand that you're an excellent, rec league basketball player. But that aside, you and I are not these kind of people who think about these things and will have to actually play in them. And I got to tell you, most of the time when you talk to guys like this and you present them with a scenario in which something bad happens if they lose and something good happens if they win, they don't think about the what if the bad thing happens, because they can't envision a world in which they do not succeed. That's how these people think. And look, I envy them. I think that's cool. I think for the fans are going to be really nervous going into an SEC championship game if that's how it shakes out for Alabama. And I think they have a right to be nervous, because I don't think there's any way that we can tell you with any certainty what the playoff committee is going to do. Anybody who tells you they do know is lying to you. So this is all new. This is all totally unprecedented, and also there are no guidelines for it. The playoff committee does not tell you what they're looking at or what's important to them or what they're thinking about. They're making it up as they go. They're going to do whatever they feel like doing. I would say Alabama probably is going to be a beneficiary of that most times, because anything that's left up to opinion and bias is going to what that means is things like Alabama's dominance over the past 20 years is going to be a factor, whether these people admit it or not. That's good news for Alabama. It's not good news if you're, say, Tennessee. And I know everyone listening to this is really their hearts are breaking for the Vols, but Alabama's reputation is stronger over time than Tennessee's is. And those things are going to play into the biases of the people on the committee as long as this is an arbitrary process. So all of that to say, Ben, I think Alabama, if you put the choice before all the players and the coaches, they'd say, we want the game every time. We want to be in it. We think if you put us in there, we're going to beat whoever we play in that game.
Let me give them an alternative thought here, right? Because I think you're right. DeBoer and the players would obviously like to play for and win an SEC championship. Winning a conference championship is a huge accomplishment, especially at a place like Alabama. It would obviously be enormous for DeBoer in his first season.
They put a big block of granite out in front of the stadium when you do it.
It would be enormous for DeBoer in his first season at Alabama. Come in, make a massive statement, especially with a win over a team like Texas. If they play Texas, secure a bye when the playoff comes. When they announced the playoff and when it looked out of reach just a few weeks ago. But I hear people suggest that it might show a lack of competitive character to essentially duck whomever they would play in the conference title game, and that doesn't really compute to me. And here's why. You're competing for a national championship, and you want to get to that game by any means necessary. So if there is a path that guarantees me a spot, and I'm just sitting out another game and avoiding potential injuries and jeopardizing a playoff berth, isn't that the more competitive approach if my goal is to win a national championship? Who cares about a conference title game if I'm trying to win the big one?
Yeah, well, the problem here is, again, you're thinking like a person who understands that in the world there are such things as failures, and people who play college football don't think that way. They go out there and they do impossible things with their bodies, and probably one of the only ways they're able to do that is because they never think about what if I fail. And it's just a different mindset. It's a different way of approaching the universe. And it's part of why these guys are so fascinating. But I look, ultimately, Ben, it's not going to be up to them. It's not up to any of these teams to play in that game or not. You play in it if you're the team that wins enough games and wins all the tiebreakers. And the SEC isn't going to allow any other outcome. And I think the other thing that they got to think about here is going forward, and we can get into this in greater depth, but if the SEC championship game does cost a team a berth in the playoff, it's going to cause the SEC and the other power conferences to reassess how this thing is structured. And the SEC is one of the two conferences that has the power to actually change how this thing is structured.
More on this soon, Matt. I mean, we're going to cover a lot of SEC title and college football playoff scenarios. Let's not get bogged down just yet, even though it is really what everybody's talking about. It's what everybody's interested in.
Yeah.
And none of this, it's possible that none of this matters, like in the grand scheme of things, because Alabama has to win their last two games. But they had a game on Saturday. They beat Mercer 52-7. I said it earlier. And Alabama is playing very well at the exact time that they need to. Jalen Milroe looked sharp throwing and running on Saturday. The defense only gave up 7 points after a 3-and-out and a bad punt, put them in a tough position. Alabama ran the ball a lot. They got to play a lot of guys. You often wonder what you'll learn from games like this. People call them cupcake games, right? But Matt, I think the biggest takeaways are that they appeared to execute the game plan with precision at a high level, and perhaps most importantly, they didn't suffer any major injuries.
Yeah, those are very important things to do. I think they also are continuing to work on chemistry between Jalen Milroe and his receivers, which even through these recent wins has been an area that still needs some improvement. And I think they're getting there. I think you're starting to see some different wrinkles added into this offense, some additional uh, run schemes that involve the wide receivers, which is more things for the opposing defenses to be worried about. And ultimately, this Alabama offense has to diversify. They have to figure out more things that work down the stretch because as great as Jalen Milroe was in Baton Rouge, you can't just do that over and over again and keep winning. Somebody's going to figure it out. And I think we are starting to see them build out that offense and find more things that they're confident doing. Defensively, I mean, the transformation is continues to be pretty amazing to me. I mean, this was a defense that we were all pulling our hair out watching not even a month ago. We were saying this is clearly not working. Is Alabama going to have to make a change at coordinator on defense? And now they look they look pretty ferocious right now. I mean, they are reminiscent of some of these classic Alabama defenses under Nick Saban, where they're making huge plays every single game. They currently lead the nation in takeaways right now, and that is something that we haven't seen from even most of the second half of Saban's tenure when it comes to his defenses. These guys are doing big things. They're playing out of their minds, and they're getting more confident every week.
Yeah, for sure. And Jalen Milroe seems to be getting more comfortable in Nick Sheridan's offense. I mean, he's played his best couple of games here in a row. I mean, you go back to the Georgia game, but LSU is just monumental for him, especially in building his confidence. And he looked really sharp against Mercer, throwing and running, like I said. And so you build some consistency game to game, you build confidence. But we saw four quarterbacks on Saturday. Jalen Milroe left the game fairly early, and we see Ty Simpson get some pretty critical reps. I mean, he got to throw the ball downfield some. He goes 5 of 10 for 70 plus yards, most of that on a 43-yard pass to tight end Josh Cuevas after Simpson avoided a sack. Pretty nifty move from him. In fact, we got to see a lot of mobility from him. You know, he isn't Jalen Milroe, but Simpson can move a little bit. He can run. We also saw Dylan Lonergan. He goes 5 of 6 for 20 plus yards. And then we see Austin Mack. He comes up and he drops a 31-yard dime to Rico Scott for a late touchdown. So, Matt, let's not overthink this. I mean, it's Mercer, but you're always excited to see the backups play, especially when you can see four of them in one game. But what did you see from the backups yesterday?
Well, I think for sure it was interesting to watch when uh, when DeBoer chose to put a new guy in and bring them out, because I believe in one case they swapped mid drive, which is a very interesting thing to do, and I think shows you that perhaps he was leaving one quarterback in to see how he played in a specific situation, which I think was actually a fourth down conversion, which he was able to convert. So I like that. I like testing these quarterbacks in game situations and saying how's he going to look in one of the more difficult positions you can put a quarterback in. Um, so I think they all did good things yesterday. It's going to be a really interesting battle in the spring to see which of these guys can assert themselves over the other, because despite being the number two guy, I don't think that Ty Simpson has necessarily locked anything up. And I wouldn't rule out Mack either. I mean, he's a guy who transferred to Alabama specifically to play for DeBoer. He's supposedly been a real asset to the team in practice and in meetings and film study. So they like this guy a lot. And then, of course, there's going to be a true freshman coming in who's one of the most heralded recruits in college football. So it's gonna be a really interesting fight to see who the guy is going to be next year, and it could be one of those years where we get to the end of spring practice and still have no idea who it's going to be.
Yeah, and last bow I'll put on this here is Jalen Milroe does have more eligibility. So you
He
never know.
does.
Most people think Most people think he'll probably go to the NFL, but there are those
Yeah.
players, right? Those quarterbacks where you think, man, this dude's been in college for like 10 years. You could say that about some SEC guys throughout the years. And will Jalen Milroe kind of be one of those guys? He gets 3 years as a starter for Alabama. Does he need one more year, you think, to fine tune his skill set and craft before he goes to the next level? We'll see. Probably not. And it's probably Ty Simpson or Dylan Lonergan, Austin Mack, Keelan Russell, depending on what his development looks like. So it was interesting, though. Fun to see them all. I mean, it's like A-Day, right? Even though it's against real competition where you never really truly know, given the context of when you're watching these quarterbacks get these reps. But it was important because they got to throw the ball, right? Typically, when these backups come in during the regular season, they're just handing it off. They're killing clock. They're throwing short passes, maybe a screen here and there, but they got to throw downfield a little bit, and it was fun to watch them do that. Every rep is important, and you never know what might happen. So good experience for those quarterbacks. And, it was good to see Alabama spread the love a little bit. A lot of guys ran the ball, a lot of catches, but you did see Brian Williams score a couple of touchdowns, a lot of the familiar faces scoring and making plays in that game. Like you said, the defense got some takeaways. We saw Xavier Brown score a non-offensive touchdown, which Alabama fans love to see. You mentioned all the takeaways. So they're all trending in the right direction, and they've got a big game coming up. I mean, Oklahoma is a weird team, Matt. I mean, they won 3 non-conference games to start the season. Then they lose to Tennessee. They bounce back with a wild road win against Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Then they've got 3 straight losses, blown out by Texas and South Carolina, then a convincing loss to Ole Miss. And then after a cupcake win over Maine, they lose to Missouri. They're 1-5 in the SEC with this Alabama game looming, and they're a win away from bowl eligibility. So they can ruin Alabama's shot at the playoff, and they can make a bowl potentially. How dangerous do you think this Oklahoma game is?
It's pretty tough, and I'd say that about the next 2 games in a row for Alabama. I think that these are part of why they're so dangerous is because it's 2 teams that have not had good seasons on the books. They have very disappointing records when you look at them on paper, and I would say in both cases the record does not reflect the quality of the team and the quality of the talent on these 2 teams, particularly on defense for Oklahoma. I think they're a really, really difficult defense to move the ball against. They're also very aggressive in the way that we've seen Alabama be recently, have a lot of takeaways this season, and particularly up front, a really powerful defensive line that's been really the Achilles heel for this Alabama offense. If they can't dominate in the trenches, nothing really seems to work for them. It's what happened. It's what happened in the Tennessee game. Really, they just could not keep those guys out of the backfield. South Carolina almost stole a win in Tuscaloosa the same way. Just it seems like this Alabama offensive line has a tough time dealing with the better pass rushing defenses in the SEC. So Oklahoma could be a problem. Now, the positive part for Alabama is Oklahoma has not had a good year offensively, and they don't seem to have a lot of weapons, and they're really struggling to put any points up. So if Alabama can make their drives count early on, if they can convert and put some points up early, you can take the crowd out of the game, and you can make it so that Oklahoma is deeply uncomfortable for the rest of the game. These guys are not built to play from behind. So I think this is a scenario where having a strong start for Alabama is particularly crucial.
Absolutely. And Brent Venables, obviously the defensive coordinator under Dabo Swinney for Clemson for all those years. Alabama had some success on offense in 2015 and 2016, but in 2017 in that semifinal game, 2018 in that national championship game when they only scored 16 points, Venables threw some things at Alabama that confused them, right? And confused good quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, these high-powered offenses that put up a lot of points during those regular seasons. Now, these are obviously different regimes, right? You're talking about Nick Saban era versus Kalen DeBoer era. So we'll see what he's able to throw at them with Oklahoma, the talent that they have there. You're right. They have trouble scoring. And so that obviously puts Alabama at somewhat of an advantage with the high-powered offense and the defense that has just been ball hawking lately. But Matt, let's look ahead a little bit. I don't want to look too far ahead on the schedule, but we can't help it. We're 2 weeks away from the Iron Bowl now. And if all goes well in Norman, the stakes are incredibly high for the Iron Bowl, which is something that Alabama fans never want to see in an Iron Bowl. They want to beat down Auburn team with nothing to play for. That's when blowouts happen, especially in Bryant-Denny Stadium. But if Auburn somehow upsets Texas A&M at home this week, they get a chance to not only ruin Alabama's season, but like Oklahoma, they can become bowl eligible. So today, what is your feeling about the Iron Bowl?
I think that it should be one that Alabama fans feel positive and optimistic about. I think that Alabama has a lot more consistency on both sides of the ball right now than Auburn does. I think that what you should not do is overlook the fact that this Auburn team does, in fact, have a lot of talented players. Now, they're not all concentrated enough in one area to make them a great team, and that's why they have not had a particularly good season. They have a quarterback who's extremely mistake prone, but he also has a really strong arm, and he has a pretty solid group of receivers. So it's kind of boom or bust for Auburn. They are capable of making spectacular, fast scoring drives on offense. They're also incredibly capable of throwing horribly timed and placed interceptions, fumbling the ball at the worst possible time. That they have had some major busts defensively against teams that have elite receivers and can get down the field on them, which I think Alabama is certainly capable of doing. What's going to be tough about playing Auburn, I think, is these guys are very tough on the defensive line. As I just mentioned before, that can be an issue for this Alabama team. They have a really, really good running back, maybe the best ground offense that Alabama will have seen this year when Auburn comes to Tuscaloosa. And they have to focus on not allowing big chunk plays to Jarquez Hunter, who is a genuinely maybe the best running back in the SEC. He just surpassed 1,000 yards for the season this past weekend. Their good players are very good. They just don't have enough of them. But sometimes you don't need as many. I mean, if you can make big plays when it counts, that's how you can pull off an upset. That's how Hugh Freeze did it both of the times that he beat Nick Saban. He did not have a more talented team than Nick Saban did in either year. He made big plays. Some of them were lucky, yes, at opportune moments. And, look, I think the fact that it's not in Jordan-Hare Stadium is a good thing for Alabama for sure. But it's not like Auburn has never won in Tuscaloosa. This is a threat. This game is a threat every single year to Alabama. And they need to have a good plan, and they're going to have to play their best ball to beat this Auburn team.
They haven't won in Tuscaloosa since 2010, and it took a miracle from a generational player like Cam Newton to come back and win that game.
But it ain't like they've never been close, Ben.
That's true.
We can go back and look at 2014, which was a game that I believe was an insane shootout.
Yes.
In Tuscaloosa, that Alabama could easily have lost that game. They just had. I mean, they were
down early.
They only won because they kept making incredible play after incredible play on offense.
You're right. It was a great. Listen, I'm not saying that to say that Auburn has no chance. I don't believe that, right? Because again, the stakes are high for them too. The bowl eligibility, ruining Alabama's season. In this game, a win like this would do a lot for Hugh Freeze, right? And his standing.
The stakes are very high for Hugh Freeze for sure.
Exactly. And if you beat Alabama, given what all has happened this year, a lot will be forgiven, right? And so Freeze is known for bringing great schemes to big games like this. And obviously he knew how to beat Nick Saban. He did it a couple of times, but Nick Saban's gone. There's some Nick Saban players, but it's Kane Womack's defense and it's Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan's offense. So it's completely different teams. And Alabama has some familiarity with how Hugh Freeze likes to do things. He nearly got them last year, obviously in Auburn, a great close game came down to the wire, and Alabama needed a miracle to win that game. So it's back and forth. It's a rivalry game, and we'll see. But I mean, again, like the scenario traditionally is good for Alabama. When you have kind of a mediocre to bad Auburn team, and Alabama is just kind of like on a warpath to potentially going to the playoff, the SEC championship. and having national championship success. That usually bodes pretty well for them. But Auburn always gets up for this game, and you have to think that Hugh Freeze has had this circled on the calendar, and we'll find out if Kalen DeBoer is ready for his first Iron Bowl.
And I would say don't even allow yourself the mental break or security of thinking that if they lose to Texas A&M this weekend, that it makes it less likely for them to pull the upset in the Iron Bowl. It doesn't. The bowl eligibility thing is nice. Auburn has it on the wall in their football facility. They care very deeply about beating Alabama, and I would argue that maybe it is the single most important thing to that program. They know.
You would argue? I mean, what are we doing here? What are you saying?
It's a different place, man. They want this game, no matter what else is going on, more than anything else, and they will give it their best, at least for a little while, in that game.
All right, we'll see. Got to beat Oklahoma first, obviously. So don't look too far ahead. Sorry we did just now. Matt, let's take a quick break. When we come back, a couple of unpopular opinions coming from us on a couple of different topics. So stick with us here on Beat Everyone. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Matt, new segment here. Unpopular opinion. It's exactly what it sounds like. You've seen the memes where somebody's facing down a crowd of people and you might say, I'm right about this opinion. All of you are wrong, right? And so I'm looking for an opinion from you like that. I'll go first, okay? I'll set the tone here for what we're looking for in terms of unpopular opinion. Just kind of a parting shot before we leave. Unpopular opinion, I don't really like the expanded college football playoff format, at least not yet. I like the parity, I do. But expanded fields don't always mean that you end up with the best result, right? Like as in you learn who the best team in the country is or determine a worthy national championship. And now I'm not a madman like our friend Matt Stahl, who thinks there shouldn't even be championship games. Yes, I watched last week, even though I wasn't here.
Talk about terrible opinions.
What a maniac. Okay, but follow him and follow his coverage. He's very good at what he does. But I mean, look at March Madness, right? Like we love the chaos. But do we always end up with the best team winning the championship? I mean, people don't care. Obviously, it's a perfect product. They shouldn't change a thing. But college football's perfect product has always been the regular season. So essentially the inverse of March Madness. Every single regular season game counts. Every win is precious for the contenders. Every loss is potentially devastating. I mean, that is real drama. But that's only true for a select few of elite programs, obviously, including the team that we cover here, Alabama. So while I like that things are more open, it's opened up for more teams, I should say, and in the early stages of NIL and the transfer portal, it's a slightly more level playing field where everybody just beats the hell out of each other. But we have to process this new normal where 10-2 and 9-3 potentially is worthy of a national championship run, and not the Capital One Bowl or the Gator Bowl where those teams would normally go. But I'm sure that when I see playoff games played in teams' home stadiums, when we see matchups that we never would have expected when the stakes are at their highest, maybe they'll make college football even better than it already is. But one reason that I've spent a lifetime loving college football is that it isn't the NFL. So that's my unpopular opinion. I don't like it yet.
I will say this, Ben. Here's where I disagree with you on it. And I also will say we don't have enough information to know whether we should like this or not yet. I have to say, though, I think so far it has made the regular season better. Or at least it hasn't diminished it at all, I don't think. I think more games matter. I think I care about more other games than I normally would have. And I think ultimately that's a good thing. And I'll say this too, Ben. You talk about the NCAA basketball tournament not always yielding the best team. I want to direct you back to 2013, okay? A year when Alabama was, I would argue, possibly the best team in college football, okay? They were undefeated going into the Iron Bowl against a team that already had a loss. But Alabama was knocked out of the national championship race because the craziest individual play of all time happened in the Iron Bowl. And that was it. They're done. Doesn't matter that they were undefeated the entire season up to that moment. They're out. I would say that's on par with your 16 upsetting a 1. And I know Auburn was better than that, but like that to me, I think that should be argument enough for an Alabama fan to say maybe having a larger sample size is not a bad idea for college football.
Yeah, I mean, I just go back to 2013, and maybe I have this wrong, but I recall that Alabama was still in the mix after they lost on the kick six, right? I think that Florida State and Ohio State had to lose their conference championship games, and Alabama could have snuck back into the BCS championship game for a rematch with Auburn. That literally could have happened. I think I've got that right, but Ohio State did lose, but FSU did win, and that gave them the title game shot against Auburn, which Auburn blew, even though they had to kick six, and that's all they had that year because they couldn't even finish the job. But anyway, that's my unpopular opinion, Matt. Let's hear yours.
Well, mine is a little bit related to that in that it's about something that changed in college football this year for the first time. I think the SEC is doing it wrong. I think they have completely mishandled how to determine a conference champion in the era of the 16-team league. They all looked at this and they said, well, of course we can't have divisions anymore because there's too many teams. And we want everybody to have a chance to play everybody else in a given period of time. I'm sorry, that's not important. It's not good. And it not only does it break up annual rivalries that matter to people that have been going on for, in some cases, 70 years or more in a row. But the single best piece of evidence I can point to that tells you that they got it wrong is look at what a mess this conference title race is right now. This isn't going to be weird. This isn't a one-time aberration. This is what it's going to be like every year. And you can ask fans of the Big 12 who've been determining conference champions this way for a while. This is what it looks like when you don't have divisions. You're having to go to the 6th and 7th tiebreaker to determine whether a team that Alabama beat has a higher winning percentage than a team that Tennessee beat, and that's going to determine who gets to go to the SEC championship. Essentially, Alabama fans are going to have to be making sure that Missouri beats Mississippi State this weekend to decide whether Alabama gets to go to the SEC championship game. That's stupid. I'm sorry. It's not how we should be determining who gets to play for the conference title. This has never been that complicated in the entire existence of the SEC championship game until now. They did it wrong. Bring back divisions. If you want to mix up who gets to play who, shuffle the divisions every year. Make it be a different group of teams in the two divisions every year. Have them randomly selected. I don't care, but you have to have divisions because you have to have a division race. And if you don't have that, you end up with a freaking 6-way tie 3 weeks into November.
Very interesting, Matt. I don't disagree with you right now because, like I said earlier, it's a total mess, and it's not a lot of fun just sort of sifting through all of the scenarios that we've gone over already, and they could change week to week, right?
And it's gonna be like this every year until they fix this.
I used to have the unpopular opinion that they needed to do away with divisions for a while, like at least while the SEC had 12 and then obviously 14 teams starting in 2012. Because I want at that point, I did want to see a more competitive SEC championship game when Alabama and LSU were the best teams, or Alabama and Auburn were, or Alabama and insert it, or Georgia and Florida, like depending on the season. But because you would get these one-sided SEC, conference championship games.
Sure, you don't want divisional imbalance, and I get that, and that's why I say reshuffle it every year. Who cares? We're not doing things based on geography anymore in college football anyway. So take the league and the way that, do it like the NFL determines the draft. You go, odd number teams go to this division this year, even number teams go to the other division based on your rank the previous year. I mean, it's as arbitrary a reason to do it as any, but it probably would help with competitiveness at least a little bit more than the way they've been doing it.
Just leave Alabama out of the SEC championship game. Like that's I think that's my popular opinion in 2024.
I get it, but I will say this. I could be biased because I got to cover a lot of SEC championship games. I lost count. I don't know how many I got to cover covering the team. But I love it. I think it's one of the coolest events in college football. It's not a bowl game and it's not a regular season rivalry game. It's something different, and it feels like such a big deal when it's happening. I think it's so cool, and I love the SEC championship game.
Man,
I just think we got to fix a little bit about it.
One thing they could fix too at the SEC championship game, and I guess they do this at Atlanta Falcons games, but like when either of the teams scores a touchdown, do you remember how they have that like train whistle plays in the Mercedes Dome, or what was the Georgia Dome?
I don't know the origin of it, but yes,
that thing is so jarring whenever it happens, because I mean each of the fan bases are so freaking hyped the fact that they're scoring a touchdown in one of the biggest games of the year, and then they just have that like train whistle sound effect, and you're just like, whoa, what's happening? But I don't know. I guess that's part of the atmosphere in a really impressive stadium with cheap concessions.
I loved it. I loved it in the Georgia Dome. I love it in the new building. I think it's a unique atmosphere, and everybody in the building cares so much about what's happening in the game. It just feels so high stakes. It's such a cool thing.
It is. You're right. It's unique. If you've never been before, you should definitely check it out. Here's hoping that your team makes it. And I'm talking to Tennessee, Georgia, anybody but Alabama. All right. Well, those are our unpopular opinions. Matt, thanks for doing this again, man.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Well, find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, and review. We appreciate it. I'm Ben Flanagan from Matt Scalici. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Beat Everyone. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.